Jackie, all you.
Technology.
I
Hello,
unmuted
can
your
everybody
line.
hear me okay? Okay, well, bonjour and welcome everyone. I was just chuckling about the instructions with this technology, and no wonder I have a tough time sometimes understanding it all. But hopefully everybody's connected and feeling comfortable with this webinar. Again, welcome. My name is Jackie Crowshoe, and we are on the third webinar of our series. I'm so thrilled that the last two we've had such wonderful participation and feedback and evaluations, and it's been such a journey, not only working with my fellow presenters, but also listening and sharing and talking with you out there in Indian country, particularly about Indigenous healing, something that we have to always keep in our hearts, keep in our spirit. So today we're talking about community and organizational healing. And I want to, because we have a pretty full agenda today, I want to kind of get us started. But first, I want to introduce our presenters, and want to start, of course, with our elder. And I don't know if Rick Two Dogs, are you with us? Would you mind introducing yourself?
Good morning, Hiniwashte. Thank you all for joining us today.
Kathleen?
Good morning, everybody. It's morning in your area. Tanyaya Hipi, it is so good you are here.
Beautiful. Penthea?
Good morning, everyone. This is Penthea Burns. I'm so pleased to be joining you for this conversation today. And I'm here thinking of my my friend and colleague, Esther Ann, who intended to be on this webinar today and has been on the two previous ones. She experienced a death in her family and is tending to her heart and to those who she loves. And so we will miss her today.
Thank you for that. Elsie, are you with us?
Yeah, Ayana Dailuji, Abogen Alwa. My Yupik name is Abogen. My name is Elsie Boudreau, and thank you so much for coming, for joining us.
Thank you, Elsie. And again, Pen, I just want to, your words and our prayers go out to Esther. I know it always feels like, even through the planning of these three webinars with the presenters and myself, it's like we're always experiencing, hardships, and we keep reminding ourselves about life on life's terms. And so just know that, our prayers and thoughts are going out to Esther. So as we have done in the past, and something that, we feel as Indigenous people is extremely important, is being able to start off these conversations in a good way, in a way that is true to who we are as Indigenous people. So with that, I want to turn it over to Rick Two Dogs and have him do an opening blessing for us. Rick?
Thank you. I'll pray in my Lakota language. Oeche Tungashla Ambetukile Heche Daku, Akion Yungra Kok Dinkreta, Oyatiki Heche Woke was me Juk the Heche Hoichi Yunkon, Ambetukile Heche Otoyohila Oyate Katiska. Oya be an Ishtona Anokopten Kapi and Tiwaya Chekseta, Hippie Hena Heche Tungashla Tiwaya topic, which actually lost, Trokata Kiwichorchari, Auki Awinsalakina Heche Trokata. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. This is Ethelene Ironcloud, Two Dogs. Shina Ikikjumi takes the robe woman. Rick and I are going to be talking about restoring Indigenous values and lifeways for community and organizational healing. We're using Lakota as an example because that's our, I guess that's our frame of reference, and it's also our tribal background that, you know, we understand that everyone has, you know, a form, a model, or an approach for indigenous values and life ways and for healing. And we encourage you to think about that as we're talking, to offer your insight and your input into this discussion as we go along. And we welcome any questions or comments as we're going along. And Jackie, if you could just call our attention to any comments in the chat box, because we have our computer on full screen and we can't see them right now. So with that, we'll go into the presentation. So if you look at this graphic, it's an example of a cultural framework for community or organizational healing. Whenever you put up a teepee, many of you are familiar with the teepee. That's mostly the Plains people used. And the word for teepee is tiikcha, which is common dwelling. And we have this belief or the teaching that the 10 poles of the teepee represent our 7 spiritual laws of the people and the 3 stars, the morning star, the evening star, and the north star. So what we understand is that whenever we put up a teepee, it's not just putting it up for shelter. It's reminding us that we have these laws and that we are encouraged to use the laws, live by the laws, and we also have the 3 stars, the Star Nation, to remind us of how to live our life so that we can live in balance. So in this graphic here, then the yellow dots represent the tripod. Those are the first 3 poles that are put up. It holds everything together. So it's the morning star, the evening star, Ampo Wichaspi morning star, Stayetu Wichaspi evening star, Wichaspi Owaji Naji, the north star, the star that never moves. So these are 3 stars that remind us, pray in the morning, pray in the evening, pray before you go to bed or at midnight. Surround yourself with prayer. The next pole to be put up after the tripod, if you look down at the bottom of the slide where it says compassion and the Lakota word is wa'ushila, that's the next pole to be put up after the tripod, and it then forms the doorway. So anybody that enters this tiikcha, this teepee, is met with compassion. And the other poles, like the other blue dots that you see, those are the other 6 laws, the woahwala, humility, woksape, wisdom, wachante ognaka, generosity, woachitanka, fortitude, woitika, bravery, waohola, respect and honor. So living in this teepee, we're reminded that this is how we are supposed to conduct ourselves. Our attitude needs to reflect this in our behavior, and toward not only ourselves but others. So we use this approach in our work in terms of, we don't live in teepees today, but we can keep the worldview about living according to these laws, whether it's individually, whether it's community, or whether it's organizationally. You know, we can have this frame of mind and live according to these Lakota values. And like I said earlier, every culture has values that that were given to them by the Creator. So this is just an example of how of a framework for healing. We wanted to talk a little bit about the threats to communities and organizations that lead to the need for healing. One of them that we've identified in our community and our organizations is the Lakota word is wo'a'ie, which is a Lakota term for gossip. And some of you know, if not all of you, have heard this, people will say, I heard, or they said, or I don't know, but, and we're kind of passing it on even though we don't really know if that's true. And in the Lakota worldview, whatever you put out, your words, whether they're good or whether they're bad, whether they're positive or negative, it will come back to you. So our worldview says, be very careful about what you say. So the gossip is one of the threats. Wonawizi, the next bullet, is the Lakota term for jealousy. Whenever we have this attitude and it's reflected in our behavior, we don't want people to have what we don't have, or we envy what they have, and then it becomes holding each other back. I won't go through all of these specifically, but just to mention them, blaming and shaming is another one. Passive aggressive behavior that includes shunning or ignoring, negative labeling, focusing on the negative. In organizations, it might be imposing rules and regulations to maintain power and control by one person or group. Another example of an organizational threat is memos that are internally distributed that verbally attack, or you might see those in our community. They call them slam sheets. So right around election time, then people will anonymously put out something that discredits or discredits somebody's character or attacks them, and it's often anonymously. Sorry. The family feuding that's brought into the community and organization. Well, I don't want to work with that organization because they, our family doesn't get along with their family. Or organizational territorialism, where we protect our organization at the cost of not collaborating, not partnering. And finally, this is just some examples, adult bullying behavior. We have these threats. So, Jackie, are there any questions or comments? If not, then we can go forward. And Rick's going to be talking about the, how we guard and protect ourselves against threats. And again, this is a Lakota example.
One of the things in our society is what we call wotake, Lakota term for kinship system. So wotake is how we address each other and look at each other as relatives. And we can use kinship relative terms, and there's examples on the screen for Japkanshi, for female cousin, Mashke, sister, friend, Trojan, niece, Troshka, nephew, Alexi, uncle, Tomi, aunt, and so forth. So it would be important in our lives as Indigenous people to restore practice of treating everyone as a relative. And also when you address someone in this in a kinship term, you're also setting up the social boundaries of our people. One of the ways to address these threats also is talking circles in the workplace and community setting. So when there's any type of a conflict, bring everybody together in a circle and have them talk about it, and then find a way to resolve it. And of course, because of the oppression that's been bestowed upon our people, you can anticipate sometimes like things that people are going to say. She's shaking hands with everyone. Is it election time? Who does she think she is? And then there's a saying among our people at home on the reservation. We say nay or whatever. It's a way of saying nay, saying or whatever. And they would say trying to be all tradish, which is cutting down the word for traditional. So those are examples of anticipating oppression. So if we store Lakho Woiwanke, Lakho worldview, we would use indigenous values in daily life, program services, and governance systems. Like example would be tribal government, school boards, tioshpais, and community boards. So we could apply, first of all, like the kinship system, addressing each other as relatives through the kinship terms, using talking circles to resolve conflict. And then one of the anticipating oppression would be we can't go back to the days of hunting buffalo and living in teepees. And we have to follow Robert's Rules of Order. And we have to move forward, not backward. So these are the things that you can anticipate that people will bring these things up sometimes and use these terms.
Just for clarification, thank you for that, Hassani, my other half. Tioshpai on the slide, T-I-O-S-P-A-Y-E, on the left-hand side is the Lakota term for extended family. So that's what is being referred to. So if you going back to this slide about the cultural framework for community organizational healing, so again, we don't live in teepees. We don't live in, how we did historically, but we can restore, reconnect, retain the Lakota or the indigenous value teachings that were given to us and apply them, use them for our organizational planning, our healing. If we have, like Rick talked about, having a conflict, transforming that conflict into healing and not to prevent it from becoming like, how people can become lifelong enemies because of a workplace conflict, and, it can prevent further escalation of, an issue. So think about this. What are some of your beliefs and values and life ways from your culture that can be depicted in a way where it can be used for your community, for your organizations, your programs, your agencies, so that we're surrounded by our values and they're integrated into our policies and procedures, our relationships with one another. So just think about that as we go forward. So lastly, we wanted to share this slide here. When the Tribal Law Policy Institute, the Children's Bureau, the NAC, the Denver University, WestAct, University of Southern Maine, the Tribal, the Tools for Growth Work Group, TFDW, when we got together, then we said that we ought to have values integrated throughout our work. And what are some of those threats? We always have to anticipate threats also, so that we can have a quote-unquote battle plan to guard against those threats. So some of those threats are structural barriers, privilege, egos, unresolved trauma, genocide, ignorance, misunderstanding, historical oppression, the current U.S. political climate, the disrespect, the distance, institutional racism. So we have those threats on the outside. What are we guarding ourselves? What are we guarding ourselves with against those threats? We've identified commitment, compassion, integrity, love, generosity, humility, spirit, prayer, honesty, humor, responsibility, sovereignty, expressing those things, connection, and respect, of course. And what is our purpose? Why do we need to have those values to guard against the threats? Because we are doing this work for children and families. So we need to make sure that we are well prepared, well armed to do the best work that we can with children and families. So with that, there might be questions and comments. And like I said, Jackie, I can't see them right now. So if you want to bring some of those forth.
Yeah, it looks like when you were talking on your slide from the threats to the communities and organizations, Eslene, there was a question about where this particular list, Raquel had asked, where did this list come from, if I'm reading it correctly? How did this list come about? How was it generated? It's good stuff.
Is this one?
Yes, I believe so, if I understood her question correctly.
Okay, how did this list come about from experience? Both of us have had, we have years of experience working with organizations in our own communities and our own families. And, we see this behavior and this conduct coming from a place of hurt and not, in terms of looking at it as coming from a place of hurt. So how do we guard against it, and how do we address it, and how do we understand it? We don't excuse it, but we know that there's an explanation for it. So hopefully that response is helpful.
Yes, thank you. And another question, Etheline and Rick, is from Heather. She's asking, may we share the circle with threats and protective factors with our clients?
Oh, yes, that would be a good idea. Thank you for that.
And I think that we have, pardon me, was somebody going to talk?
No.
Okay. Well, any other questions for Etheline and Rick? And if you feel comfortable, please feel free to write them in that chat room. If you are able to, you can unmute your line and ask, and we can help get your answers. If there are no questions, again, it's difficult because folks are chatting and, because of technology, we have a little bit of a delay that can be awkward, but please, I want you guys to feel, it looks like there was a question coming in. It reads, in the last slide, what are the words in the middle? This is from Janice Holt. And are you talking about in the yellow, the abbreviations, Janice? Yes, she's talking, Etheline, and I can just go ahead. In the beginning, Etheline mentioned the partners to the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, which comes out of the Children's Bureau. And so those are just the acronyms for the Tribal Law Policy Institute, the University of Southern Maine, the Tools for Growth Work Group, Denver University or Butler. So just that's where those come from. And perhaps what we can do as presenters is talk about ways in which we can make this particular slide more presentable to our audience as opposed to some internal dialogue that we've had. But I think the beautiful thing that Etheline did is just shared with you all ways in which we have looked at ways to protect ourselves and to continue doing this work from an authentic Indigenous way. So I hope that we were able to answer that question, Janice. I'm going to ask Elsie if she is ready to join us. And again, if there are more questions, please continue to use that chat room. Elsie?
Kayana, Jackie, I just want to thank Rick and Etheline, thank Rick specifically for the prayer. I think it's always really important to start in a good way, and especially when we're talking about healing, we have to tend to the spirit of who we are as people, and it's in that place that we bring healing. So, and thank Etheline for bringing together all those values that bring us together. And so, Yupiuko, Abukanauko, my Yupik name is Abukan. I'm named after my maternal grandmother. And when I introduce myself, I feel her spirit connected to me. And while I've never met her, I'm named after my maternal grandmother. So there's a connection that goes very, very far, and I think about her name and how she was named after an Abogen. and how that connection goes so far and so deep, so over generations. And with that, we have a responsibility to each other, like Rick and Etheline were talking about in terms of the kinship worldview and how we treat others with compassion, and how compassion was the first, after the stars, the compassion was the first door. And that's in line with our Yupik teachings too. Our elders have said, when we teach our children, we teach first from compassion. And the teachings are enriched by kindness and compassion. So I am the founder and president of Arctic Winds Healing Winds. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to bring healing to communities throughout Alaska. And my vision is that it could bring healing to communities throughout the nation. But the vision behind that is that those who lead with a healing heart will change the world. And it's actually a name that my son came up with. I myself am a survivor of sexual abuse. And through my process of healing and finding my voice, Arctic Winds Healing Winds was formed, because I got to a place in my life where I knew that healing was possible, and I wanted to share that with other people. So my son came up with this name, and in a way it was like an honor. He honored me by coming up with this name. He said, we're from the Arctic, and when we speak, we create wind, and when we speak the truth, we heal. And so with that, one of the things, because we're talking about community healing and organizational healing, the premise behind Arctic Winds Healing Winds, and one of the programs that we offer, is a Leadership for Results Summit. But our mindset, and I see this in line with our Yupik values, is that we are all leaders, and that as leaders, we have the capacity to love. And so we believe that leadership resides in everybody, and that can be nourished and developed. What we know is that our Yupik elders have said that leaders were those that thought of other people first, were strong in their mind and in their heart. And so what we know is that leadership can be associated with qualities like spirit or energy, patience, perseverance, vision, innovation. So it's not necessarily, when we think about leadership, not the vertical way of like associated with power or rank. It's that we are interconnected, and we have a relational system of connecting with other people. So what we know is that leaders, and all of us are leaders, that we have the capacity to inspire others to action. And so when we think about all the threats that Etheline pointed out, like historical trauma, oppression, and racism, all those things, we can get to a place where we can build our capacity for compassion and for love. And all those values that protect us from all those threats are internal and part of our relationship, and build and grow as part of our relationship with other people within the community. So one of the things that Arctic Winds Healing Winds did in terms of the Leadership for Results summit is that we had action learning groups, is what we called them, and each group addressed different issues. And in addressing those issues, they came up with projects or solutions to each of those issues. And so they addressed domestic and sexual violence, substance abuse and tobacco use, suicide prevention and youth wellness, substance abuse and mental health. And what we know is that all of these things are threats to our community, threats to who we are, and that we need healing from all of these. And we're talking about people that we love, people that we know, and finding a way to bring healing to communities, not just so we've talked about healing individuals, healing families, and what we know is that, you know, all those, like historical trauma, for example, that happened to a wide group of people. And because that happened, we cannot just heal individually. We have to heal collectively, and bringing voice to that, and honoring that part of us that was hurt. And as Native people, I really believe we're at a point in our history, in our time, where we have a word. The first step in any kind of healing is to be able to name it. And so we have the word historical trauma, and we can break that down and identify what all of that is, and then we can do something about it. So the Action Learning Groups is an example of communities in Alaska that have addressed those issues. So here are some examples of the different groups that addressed various issues. So this Discovery group so they addressed the challenges or issues in our community and what strengths they had to develop help. So they basically wanted to identify a project that grew out of the need for connection, especially for youth. So that's one example. So they wanted to create an app, you know, so like we can be creative in our application of any of these projects. So they wanted to create an app for specifically the homeless youth, so they could get in touch with various resources. And then another group was addressing tobacco, and they came up with the name Don't Puff Your Life Away. And they created a Facebook page, and we have over 200 and some members on that page, and they identify ways to combat tobacco use using traditional knowledge and wisdom. And then the Dunkik group. Dunkik is light, and they address the suicide issue. So what they did, each of these groups went out into their communities, and they collected information from the people within the communities, and from that identified the need. So it was the people within their communities' voices that expressed the need. And this particular group decided to create a flyer to address suicide. So one of the things that they learned is that many times when there's suicide, helpers with really, really good intentions will go out to the schools and talk to kids and let them know that they're there for them. But what they learned from talking to the youth is that many of the youth do not know how to feel or what they're feeling or what to talk about. And so they created a flyer, and you can see to the bottom left, there's the flyer that was created. And it basically helps youth to understand what they may be feeling, what they could talk to certain individuals about. So it was a way to connection. So the opposite of isolation is connection. And many times when people are hurting, when they're dealing with all those threats, they do it in isolation and hurt and beat themselves up or hurt themselves. And so the opposite of that is connection. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on each of these projects. We do have them available on the Tribal Information Exchange, and Laura has provided the link. But it goes into more detail, each of the what we call infographics regarding each of those projects. And we have another Be the Change group, and they address domestic violence and sexual assault. And so focusing on healthy relationships and what that means. So what I always want to end when we talk about community healing, respecting an elder, traditional healer, Dr. Rita Pitka Blumenstein. And she has this beautiful quote that we are free to be who we are, to create our own life out of the past and out of the present. We are our ancestors. When we can heal ourselves, we also heal our ancestors, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our children. When we heal ourselves, we heal Mother Earth. And so I just want to end with that and know that I just want to honor each of you and the work that you do and coming here and wanting to bring healing to our communities.
Thank you, Elsie. So I just want to reach out and see if anybody has questions. I also want to thank Laura for posting a link to those infographics, as well as a link to a video that talks a little bit about the work that has been done from Arctic Wind Healing Winds. So you can see that there are 2 links in your chat room. We'll also be sure to include this at the end. But let me ask, does anybody have questions for Elsie in some of the work that was done up in the villages, as well as in Fairbanks in Alaska? Okay, well, I'm going to assume there are some folks typing, so I want to respect that and not try to jump ahead too far. But what I will do is I really want to kind of hear from some of you out there and just talk a little bit about some healing that's been done in your communities, or more examples of community healing that has been done. As you're doing that, Laura is going to put up a poll question for us. And the question that we have for everybody is, have you participated in any kind of community healing? And again, recognizing that, this could be basket making, this could be, regalia, gatherings, making regalia, spiritual runs, community gardens. I know a lot of women, when we were together, are making ribbon skirts. And so as folks are answering that poll question, I want to also be cognizant if there are any questions in the chat room. Oh, this multitasking is really not for me, but I'm going to keep pretending like it is.
Done a really good job, Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to laugh and go with it. So again, the poll question is, have you participated in any community healing?
And Jackie,
I know
this
some
is
have
Laura.
even identified. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, I know we have a couple of people who are only connected on audio, and so just wanted to remind the folks who may be on their telephone only and not on the web that they can press *6 on their phone to unmute their line and share.
Thank you. So it looks like we're still getting some answers. And again, just to remind folks, you know, the way in which, you know, even some of the examples Elsie gave us, that the community healing can look so different for so many communities. You know, a lot of times tribes will host their own powwows. I know that even some of the foster care programs out there have brought in their current foster parents and have done some gatherings. I know Sandy Whitehawk has brought in and has welcomed the adoptees home, and she's done ceremonies around that. I know we've had some wiping of the tears, some very specific ceremonies around healing and community healing. And it looks like the majority of you out there, of course, have participated in community healing. So what I want to do is just kind of hear back, like what are some things that you have done in your community? I know folks have mentioned Sundance ceremonies every year. Any others, if you could unmute your mic or perhaps share with us in the chat room. And I'm just going to pause for a bit for those who want to share some of the ways in which their communities have been getting together and have done healing together. And Laura, are mics unmuted or are they muted?
So those that are listening in through their computer speakers can't use their microphones because the microphone doesn't work with this, so they have to share via the chat. Those on the telephone can unmute their own line by pressing *6 on their telephone keypad.
Hello, I'm Laura Blue Horse Swift. Can somebody hear me? Anybody?
We sure can.
Oh, so we've done, recently we've been doing a lot of work on MMIW, and we've sponsored some community events that have been really well attended, and we've got done advocacy to have human trafficking incorporated into our tribal law and order codes, and we're working on bringing that training to tribal staff and trauma-informed practice to all family serving staff. We've done GONAs in community, so there's a lot going on, and our tribe that I work for is sponsoring the canoe journey this year. It's a huge event, expecting like 10,000 people, so there's a lot of good work going on.
Oh yeah, and which tribe are you calling from?
Puyallup tribe.
Oh, perfect. Beautiful. And I know that there are other people who are also saying that they have been doing a lot of work and dedicating and honoring their time and attention to the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Others in the chat room have talked about doing women healing retreats. And then there is a community gardening I love that idea, talking about the hands in the soil and that sense of space. Folks have talked about yoga, alternative therapy, essential oils, guided meditation, energy and sound healing. One of the things, too, that I want to mention is that, speaking of the murdered and missing Indigenous women, I always want to throw in some of the products that we have been creating or have created through the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And one that we are currently working on is a sex trafficking toolkit. And so, soon it should be released. And I'm excited because I know a lot of tribes are asking and wanting information about how they can address either an awareness campaign or how they can look at some intervention strategies. So just want to always mention some of the products that we're doing, and all of those are available on the Tribal Information Exchange. Anybody else want to unmute their line and share some of the community healing efforts that have been done? And again, just wanting to be respectful, I know something that had come up in one of our very first healing conversations was just that sometimes healing can be and look very personal. And so I also want to respect that some of the ways in which you may be taking care of yourself or, working with your community is something that you hold near and dear, and it's very sacred, and you might not feel comfortable in sharing on a webinar. So I also want to respect that out there and recognize, that you may be here just to listen and learn. So, with that, I want to, again, just be cognizant of the chat room and making sure that folks who are feeling comfortable in sharing, that we are also reading that and sharing with all of you. So, but I also want to talk or actually introduce our next presenter, Penthea, and she is going to step in and talk a little bit about the work that's been done out east. So Penthea, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. And thank you to the other presenters, Rick and Etheline and Elsie, who came before me and really presented beautifully about the work they are doing in their communities and for their people. I want to talk for a bit about the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission that occurred here in Maine. I work as part of a team of people with an organization called Maine Wabanaki Reach, which is a collaboration of Native and non-Native people who are working to promote truth, healing, and change, and within the tribal and state relations here in Maine and within those communities as well. This work happens in the territory of the Chewabanaki people, the people of the land where the sun first looks our way. In Maine, we most often refer to them as the Wabanaki people or people of the dawn. This photo is the sun rising in the easternmost point of this territory. The Wabanaki people include 4 different tribes, 5 tribal communities, the Maliseet, the Micmac, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. The Wabanaki people have suffered the brunt of colonization, having had the longest contact with the Europeans who arrived in this territory. The map on your left shows what Wabanaki territory looked like in part before colonization, and the map on the right, the small pink spaces are where their lands and reservations are today. there were once over 20 tribes as part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, and there are 4 who remain to this day. Beginning in the early 1600s, when first contact occurred over a 3-year period known as the Great Dying, about 75% of Wabanaki people perished due to disease, and there were more epidemics that followed, as well as scalping proclamations. The Spencer Phipps Proclamation in 1755 was one of those bounties that took the lives of Wabanaki men, women, and children, as well as other strategies of genocide with smallpox blankets, and really all with the purpose, as we know, was to take possession of the land. By 1800, Wabanaki people lost over 90% of their people due to disease, wars, and genocide. In 1803, there were only 347 Penobscot people left, down from, I think it was over 10,000 before Europeans arrived here. We know that was followed by other strategies, including the taking of the children through boarding schools, adoption, and foster care. And in 1999, a collaboration of Native and non-Native people of tribal and state foster care programs began, known as the ICWA Work Group. And that group, despite their sort of mistrust, came together and began their own truth-telling process, faced the oppression that lived within and between those systems, and began to examine privilege and harm that had been done. The individuals who were part of that worked together over sort of an initial 9 years to acknowledge, to grieve together, and to begin some kind of healing process together. So the relationships between those individuals became stronger, built with more trust, and began some work improving training, improving case review systems, and at the same time noticed that the work in the field, what was happening with kids and families, that challenges still existed, and recognized that racism and oppression was alive throughout the system, and in our work together decided that it was time for some sort of process that could create a greater shared understanding, with a hope that that could lead to, if we know where we came from, then we have a better chance of understanding and creating a change that might be more lasting and more impactful for Wabanaki children and families. And that began the process of establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In 2008, that process began, and began with the state and tribal partners agreeing to do this, and the Wabanaki partners in particular having some time to talk about what do we want to get out of this process. And then the state came back into the process, and they worked collaboratively going forward. In 2012, the mandate for the Truth Commission was signed by the 5 Wabanaki chiefs and by the governor of the state of Maine, and the commission was seated early in 2013 and began their work at that time. They had 27 months to investigate the experiences of Wabanaki people in the state child welfare system, and did so, issuing their report in June of 2015. And I think Laura is going to post some links to both some films that help to tell some of this story, as well as a link that would help you get to the Commission's report. I would say one of the unique features about this Truth and Reconciliation Commission compared to others that have occurred around the world is that it was one of the few who put a focus on healing in addition to issues of justice. It was one of the only ones that we know of in this country that was focused on tribal child welfare matters, and it was one of the only ones that we know of where both parties, both sides, the one who represent the oppressor group and the people who represent those who are hurt, came together to design the Truth and Reconciliation process in partnership. And that has been part of the model, seeking healing both within those communities and organizations, as well as between those communities and organizations, or systems, I would say, as well. Some key findings from the Commission is they found that Native children in Maine entered foster care at a disproportionate rates. Their job was to look at that time period from the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978 to the present day. And during that time, Native children are 5 times more likely to enter foster care in Maine than non-Native children. Some of the other things that they noted is that, one of the key problems to that is in at least 53% of the time, a Native ancestry is not verified. And so that not being found, there are probably more children in the system than we might know of. And powerfully, the Commission acknowledged the impact of institutional racism, and that these factors represented evidence of ongoing cultural genocide. So those were really powerful for people to be able to hear that those realities being recognized. These are some of the images from pieces of the work that happened over the time that the Commission worked together, and the people connected to Maine Wabanaki Reach. I think one of the things that we noticed is that in Wabanaki communities, in this process, the most important thing was the truth being told and the truth being acknowledged. It was an experience of validation. One of our people on our team talks about, it's like we've been walking around with something wrong and we finally have a diagnosis, we finally understand what is going on. It promoted some hope for the possibility of change and the hope for protecting their children. And the other powerful part was in Wabanaki communities, more people are using the word intergenerational trauma. They're talking about genocide. They're talking about what has happened across and understanding what has happened to them and that it's not their fault. In Maine communities and the non-Native communities, we've done a lot of work in those communities as well. It is one of the things that we also learned is that non-Native people were more eager for the reconciliation part of the process, and really, in some ways, I think wanted to ease their guilt, and had to slow down to be able to sit with the truth, with the discomfort of the truth, and to use that truth as a way of understanding who we are and how we have benefited from the harm that has been done to Wabanaki people. So education about this history and its impact, how it is alive today, how it has resulted in privileges that we experience, has been a really important part of this work. And we have learned probably as much from our mistakes as we have from our successes as well. We now look at this work so if we had to do it over again, we might not call it a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We might call it a Truth and Restoration Commission, and really use that lens of community restoration and decolonization, writing a different history for our grandchildren as the way that we look at the work. And we are not experts, but learning deeply through this process. In Wabanaki communities, they are learning about trauma, understanding that it is not their fault, and that they have within their communities and within their people and their traditions, as Rick and Ethelene showed us earlier, and as Elsie did as well, they have the agency and the capacity for healing. And that by sharing their truths and listening to each other, by being together in ceremony, in celebration, and in mourning, and by reclaiming their language, their traditions, and their rituals, from birth through puberty to death, those are ways to assert their sovereignty and to be able to be who they are meant to be, who the Creator wanted them to be. They're connecting with each other, to themselves and the earth through many of the kinds of things that you all were describing. One beautiful piece of the work that's happening in the Wabanaki communities is peace and healing circles in the main prisons that began during the Truth and Reconciliation process and continue to this day in all of the prisons with Native people who are incarcerated. And so they have an opportunity to sit together, to hear their language, to practice their traditions and ceremonies, and to learn different strategies for self-care, self-soothing, so they might learn meditation. And some of the beautiful things that are happening is that they're going back to their cells and they're teaching their cellmates how to meditate. And so when things are going haywire in the prison, these men and women are sitting in their cells meditating, and their behavioral reports are decreasing for those people who are participating in the circles. There's so much to say about that. It's a beautiful piece of work. The healing work is happening in the main communities as well, though it's easy to want to strive for reconciliation first. We really have to, in some ways, experience some destabilization ourselves, and to let go of the impact of colonization on the way our systems are built in order to have a more just future for everybody. That there's times when we have to sit back and listen and be quiet, and there are times when we have to speak up and take us so that our Native brothers and sisters don't have to be the only ones bringing attention to this. I'm going to say one final thing and then pass it back to Jackie. There was a documentary film that was created about the Truth and Reconciliation process that occurred here in this area. It's called Dawn Land. It's done, and it's very exciting. And beginning in the fall, it will be made publicly available during the month of November, and we don't know the date at this time. On PBS, there's a program called Independent Lens, which shows on Monday evenings at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Excuse me. And Dawnland will be broadcast on that program, I think one Monday in November. So that is still being worked on, and I hope that you might have a chance to see that. So I think I'm going to pause and stop talking and pass it back to Jackie.
Thank you, Penthea. I just am pausing here because there's been so much good information, that is being shared here on this webinar. And again, my wish is to make sure that you are all getting what you need out there. If you have any questions, please, again, feel free. I see there are conversations happening in the chat room, resources that are being shared, so I appreciate that. And does anybody have questions about some of the work that's been done out east that Penthea talked about with their Truth and Reconciliation? And I know, Penthea, you mentioned a little bit of the, as it was all unfolding, some of the true healing that came out, when folks were sharing their stories for the first time, there was a lot of pain that came out and that was witnessed by others. And I imagine with that a lot of healing.
Yes, most definitely. And, I will say that the end of the Truth Commission is just another beginning in the healing journey. I will say there are other places in the country that are talking about, I see Margaret's comment, that are talking about having some kind of Truth Commission process. And so we do hope that we can support others who might want to do the same kind of thing.
And again, thank you, Penthea, for stepping in and sharing that. And I know that you had, as much to do with just a very different perspective with the work of Wabanaki Reach and the Truth and Reconciliation work out east. So I appreciate you kind of stepping in and helping us share that information today. And also, I know that Laura had also posted a resource in there, How Foster Care Native American Children of Their Own Cultures, which was an article that was posted by Teen Vogue maybe a week or two ago. And I know that she has provided a link to that resource, as well as other resources in there to the dawnland.org trailer that Penthea mentioned regarding the video that's coming up, the film that's coming up on the work out east. Just wanting to make sure if there's anything else I've missed for those of you that are not able to see the conversation in the chat room. Again, Laura posted the commissioner's report. So I hope we're catching it all. Are there any questions for Penthea that you want to unmute and ask about some of the work that's happened out east?
Jackie, this is Etheline. I just wanted to make a comment about, first of all, the relatives from the East were the first ones to meet, the colonizers, and they suffered, I think, the most, as far as like whenever she showed the map. I'm very saddened to see that, and to know that so many were wiped out. And so how, what are some of the healing strategies that need to be shared, and she mentioned several of them through the commission. I just wanted to make a comment also about, Penthea, what you said about decolonization. And I think that is something that we as communities, if we could really highlight that work, because I know that in our community, whenever we said we wanted to do something different that was rooted in our Lakota culture and traditions to help our children and families, then we came together and we had to do a lot of sharing, a lot of crying, a lot of expressing anger and rage about what happened to us, not only individually but intergenerationally. And how does that healing get reflected in our policies and procedures, for example, which is a very Western construct, but when you think about it, that's where the application should really be highlighted. So for our group, what we talked about was we gathered people together and we said we want to change our way of treating our children and families whenever they have mental health needs like depression, all of the labels that, we give them. So where do we start at, as far as, doing something different that's based on our culture? And the people that are trained in social work, mental health, the Western training systems said we need to do an assessment first. Once we do an assessment, then we will know how to proceed. And an elder from the group said, no, we need to kigana them, which is a Lakota word for comfort. And that has stayed with me all these years because that is where we need to start. The elder said, maybe this child, maybe this family is exhausted from going through what they've been through. Maybe they haven't had anything to eat. Maybe they need to drink something or just rest or be listened to. And that was the definition, I guess, for comfort, for Kigana in our language. So that's one of the, the practices that we've integrated or incorporated into our work with children and families. We don't start with a paper, pencil type of activity or asking them questions that are oftentimes intrusive. We listen, give them food, give them something to eat, comfort them, and then proceed after that. So I just wanted to share that, as far as like the decolonization work for community healing.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Thank you for that. I'm just kind of watching the clock here as well as the chat room, and want to make sure that when we have been on the other webinars, we've talked about this this quilt, creating some kind of quilt poster. And so I just want to mention to folks that, we are still accepting your images, so we're hoping that you will be sending them in to us. And again, once we receive the images, and really it's just images that reflect Indigenous healing and that, you would want to share with us. So we've received, as you can see on some of them within this star, that it can look different ways. There's a young man who just finished his ceremony and an elder is sitting beside him talking to him. There's canoeing, there are folks running, so it's a young baby on his dad's lap at a drum. And so what we want to do is continue to encourage you guys to send us your images so we can include them, because what we want to do is we want to create a poster of this quilt, and we want to send it to you as participants. And what would be wonderful is if you have sent us images, you would be able to see some of your images in this quilt as well. So please send them to Laura, and her email will be on the next slide. But I just, what a great reminder to have these Indigenous healing posters all around us, whether it's in our homes or in our offices, sharing them with our tribal leaders, our communities. So I just want to make sure that we're mentioning that, and would really look forward to your images. There is the link that you can send them to, and then also I want to remind folks that we have been recording these webinars, and that we have a link that we will also, not only here you can click on it, but also we will be providing that to you in a follow-up email with the recordings themselves. And just, I want to remind folks that, the first webinar that we had was really, healing for Indigenous people, individuals, and how we are all connected. Excuse me, the title of it was How We Are All Connected. And it just being, a powerful journey that can be collectively shared, or that it's our own personal path. And so we just want to remind folks that we have that first webinar. And just to recap, the second one was on individual and family healing. And we talked a little bit about that being a lifelong process, and that it's really unique to each one of us as an individual, and that it really starts with our own individual healing. And that it's a stop and go process, and it can also searching in different paths. And then, of course, this webinar. I also want to remind folks that we will have an evaluation that will follow, and we would love for you guys to take a minute and fill that out so we can get some feedback from you on that. So I just want to also take a break quick. Is there any quick questions or feedback or things you want to remind others out there about? How about to my presenters, Penthea, Elsie, Etheline, and Rick? Is there anything that we want to add to this conversation?
I'd just like to, this is Etheline, I'd just like to thank all the participants and then really encourage these healing activities. We're seeing an increase in healing camps in our community, which is so wonderful. I just came from on the 28th Monday from a girls healing camp, coming of age camp, and then we're going into a children's healing camp that we're sponsoring on June 29th to July 3rd. And then we have another girls healing camp in August. So I'm just really encouraging people, like to encourage people to, from your own culture, to really organize and implement these healing activities. Because I found that whenever we do these, whenever we sponsor these, and a lot of it is volunteer, work and time and energy, that we get, blessings in return from extending our spirit. So I just like to encourage people out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Etheline. This is Elsie. I just want to add to that, too. I mean, just imagine all the people that are doing this healing work, and there's energy to it, right? And so all the youth that are seeing this have a different way of operating in the world rather than all the, the hurts. It brings hope to our communities, and if we could put more of that out there in the universe, how much better our world will be. So, thank you.
And it looks like there was a question that was asked in the chat room regarding, does anyone know of any funding resources to support local communities or tribes in organizing and facilitating such healing events? So I'm going to pose that to others. And again, the question was, does anyone know of funding resources to support local community tribes in organizing and facilitating such healing events?
This is Penthea. I would say that, here in Maine, we have looked at, there's a philanthropy center here, and we've looked at a lot of different Maine foundations that are focused on things like health and wellness. There's some foundations that do work around adverse childhood experiences, and they have been really open to funding things like this. Our community foundation has a variety of small grants or donor-advised funds that could support some of these things. We did have some success with getting funding from the Kellogg Foundation, we have an application in now to the Seventh Generation Fund. So those are some of the ones that that we have utilized here in the work that's happened here.
And it looks like some other folks have talked about some resources. American Association of Indian Affairs provides support for camps. What else am I reading? And it looks like there was a question out there about the quilt images. And again, if you could send us those images, the deadline for that would be June 15th, because we're super excited about putting it together for a poster and getting it to you all. So June 15th would be the deadline to get us your images. And I'm just looking at the time, and it's 2:23. Oh, it looks like there is another comment about CTAS. I'm not sure what that stands for. Allows for supporting tribal, cultural, spiritual events, but the events need to be a part of a grant package that fits under one of their purpose areas. Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation is what CTAS stands for. Good. I love how much resources are being shared here. And again, Laura will also put these together for us, but you can also copy and paste them as well. Well, before we look at closing this out, are there any other comments or thoughts, suggestions that folks have about these webinars, being we're going to put a close to the series? So with that, and again, I apologize if I have, cut anybody off or have felt at all disrespectful. I think it's doing the best job I can, making sure that we're capturing your questions, your comments, just your voice, because it's really an opportunity for all of us to come together and share the wonderful work that's happening, our own personal journeys, the journeys in our communities, and and recognizing that as Indigenous people, we have some beautiful, beautiful ways, and the resiliency out there is strong, and given what is happening in our communities, or even on the political scale, and the threats that are happening, it's just such a reminder of how beautiful we are as people coming together like this. So I just appreciate all of you that have been able to come in and sit with us during these series, and we want to kind of make sure that we're keeping this going, so please fill out the survey. And I want to turn this over to my sister Elsie and ask her if she wouldn't mind closing this series out with a prayer for us as we bring this to a close. Elsie?
Thank you, Jackie. I will do my best to close in a prayer. I feel like I usually look to elders, and so I will speak to you from my heart, and know that I will speak from a place where I know we're all connected. So Hoyana, Samuel, Hoyana for being here, universe, person of the universe. You know what's in our hearts. You know what's in the hearts of all our children. You know that there is love that connects all in a way that brings healing, not only for us, but for generations to come. And what we do today impacts and will heal and honor our ancestors. We come from a strong people. Hoyana, for helping and being present with our ancestors. Hoyana, for all the gifts for each other, for all the teachers that we have, even the babies, who open their hearts so trustingly and know of the good in the world, and know that know of the goodness that people can share, that come from compassion. And I know that, as people, we came together, this group of people that came together with the hope of bringing healing, that we have, we're on a path, and that there's no mistake that we are right where we're supposed to be. And we honor each of us in our own journey as we are all connected. So, Hoyana, for that. And I just want to close by sharing, it's our values of who we are as Native people, and it comes from the Alaska Native ways of knowing. Show respect to others. Each person has a special gift. Share what you have. Giving makes you richer. Know who you are. You are a reflection on your family. Accept what life brings. You cannot control many things. Have patience. Some things cannot be rushed. Live carefully. What you do will come back to you. Take care of others. You cannot live without them. Honor your elders. They show you the way in life. Pray for guidance. Many things are not known. See connections. All things are related. Koyana so much.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.